Close your eyes now, if you are ready. Let the weight of the day settle into the surface beneath you. Let your hands grow still, and allow yourself to be carried backward, not through years, not through centuries, but through the kind of darkness that existed before calendars, before kingdoms, before the first priest ever pressed a reed into wet clay and called it sacred truth. There is a place I want to take you. It is not comfortable. It is not safe in the way that modern things are safe. But it is real, in the way that only very old things are real, with the weight of stone and the patience of sealed jars, and the particular silence of a desert that has kept its secrets for 2,000 years without being asked. You are standing at the edge of the Judean wilderness. The year does not matter yet. What matters is the air, which is dry and sharp, and carries the faint mineral smell of salt from the great dead inland sea that lies somewhere below you in the darkness. The cliffs here are pale limestone, almost white in the day, but now, in whatever hour this is, they are the color of old bone. The caves in those cliffs are not dramatic. They are not grand openings in the rock. They are small, almost accidental-looking apertures, the kind of holes in the earth that you might walk past 100 times without pausing. But inside those holes, sealed in clay jars wrapped in linen, something was sleeping, something that had been placed there deliberately, with great care, by hands that knew they were making a decision that might last longer than the community that made it, longer than the language it was written in, longer than the world those hands believed was about to end. This is the world of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And before we go further into it, I want you to understand something about what it means to live inside a theology of ending, not as an abstraction, not as a philosophical position adopted from a comfortable distance, but as a daily, bodily, atmospheric reality. The people who wrote these documents, copied them, argued over them, and finally sealed them in stone and clay and darkness. They did not believe the end was coming, the way we use that phrase now, loosely, metaphorically, as a way of describing anxiety. They believed the end was a scheduled military campaign. They believed they knew the phases of it. They believed they had been chosen, specifically, cosmically, before their own birth, to be on one side of it. And they believed the other side was not merely wrong, but was organized, angelic, commanded, and patient. Breathe slowly now. We are going deeper. The settlement the scholars call Qumran sits on a narrow terrace of marl and stone, wedged between the cliffs and the sea. The Dead Sea itself is not like other water. It does not move the way water should move. It lies flat and metallic under the sun, so dense with salt that nothing lives in it, and its shores are encrusted with white mineral formations that look, in certain lights, like the bones of a landscape that has already died. The community that built its life here understood this geography as theological. The desert was not a punishment, it was preparation. The wilderness was not absence. It was the only honest environment in which to wait for the end of a corrupt world. The settlement itself was not large. Scholars have measured the complex at roughly 260 feet by 330 feet. Within that space, there were cisterns cut deep into the rock to catch the rare desert rain, a sophisticated aqueduct system running from the wadi above, assembly halls, a pantry with hundreds of pottery vessels stacked in careful rows, and, most significantly, a room with low tables and inkwells. A room where scribes sat in the desert heat and pressed words into leather with reed pens, hour after hour, year after year. The scholars call this room the scriptorium. It is one of the most consequential rooms in the history of human thought, not because of what was invented there, but because of what was preserved there, and what was sealed away from it when the time came. The texts produced and collected at Qumran number over 900 manuscripts, drawn from 11 caves across the surrounding cliffs. They include the oldest surviving copies of nearly every book of the Hebrew Bible. But the texts that concern us most tonight are not the biblical ones. They are the sectarian documents, the texts that belong to this community alone, that describe its rules, its theology, its history, its enemies, and its vision of how the world would end. These are the texts that were not found anywhere else. These are the texts that were sealed in jars and hidden in darkness, because the community that wrote them knew, or believed it knew, that the final war had already begun. Let me tell you about the community rule, which the scholars catalog as 1QS. It is the governing document of the sect, the manual of their shared life, and it contains within it a passage of such philosophical density and atmospheric weight that it has occupied scholars for decades without being fully explained. The passage describes what the text calls the two spirits, not as metaphors, not as poetic devices, as literal cosmic forces that divide all of human reality between them. The spirit of truth, aligned with light, with the Prince of Light, with the angelic host of the righteous, and the spirit of falsehood, aligned with darkness, with the figure the text calls Belial, with the army of everything that opposes the divine order. Every human being, the text says, is constituted according to the kind of spirit they possess. And the God of knowledge, who established all things before they existed, determined the design of every person before that person drew their first breath. Sit with that for a moment. Before you were born, the text insists, your lot was already assigned. Not your choices, not your moral trajectory, not the arc of your life. Your lot. The domain to which you belong. The side on which you will march when the final battle is called. The community rule does not present this as a doctrine to be debated. It presents it as the structure of the universe, as obvious and as inescapable as the fact that darkness follows the setting of the sun. This is the philosophical horror at the center of the Qumran worldview, and it is worth dwelling in it rather than rushing past it. The modern mind tends to assume that the self is sovereign, that we are the authors of our own moral identities, that we choose our values, that we construct ourselves through the accumulation of decisions made in freedom. The community rule says something categorically different. It says that what you take to be your choices may be nothing more than the expression of a nature that was assigned to you before you existed. That your sense of moral agency may be the surface of something far older and far larger than any individual life. That the universe is not a neutral field in which persons wander freely. It is a divided territory, and every soul is already a citizen of one half or the other. Breathe. Let the darkness hold you. We are going further in. The document known as the War Scroll, catalogued as 1QM, is unlike anything else in the library of ancient religious literature. It is not a prophecy in the conventional sense. It is not a vision received by a single inspired individual and then recorded for posterity. It is a military manual. It describes, in specific and meticulous detail, the conduct of a 40-year war that the sect believed was coming, perhaps soon, perhaps already beginning in the events of their own time. The war would be fought between the sons of light, which is to say the sect itself and its angelic allies, and the sons of darkness, which encompassed apostate Jews, foreign imperial powers, and the entire angelic host commanded by Belial. The structure of the war is itself theological. It is divided into 7 phases, or lots. In 3 of the lots, the sons of light prevail. In 3 of the lots, the sons of darkness prevail. The horror of this arithmetic is worth pausing over. The text does not promise an easy victory. It does not promise that righteousness will simply overwhelm wickedness by the sheer force of its moral superiority. It acknowledges that the forces of darkness will win 3 times, that the righteous will be driven back, that the battle will seem lost, that the darkness will advance and the light will retreat. 3 victories for light, 3 for darkness, and then the 7th lot, in which the great hand of God descends and the forces of Belial are destroyed without remainder. The enemy coalition named in the War Scroll is both historical and mythological. The Kittim, a term the community used for imperial oppressors, are allied with Edom, Moab, Ammon, the Amalekites, Philistia, and the various nations that appear throughout the Hebrew prophetic tradition as the archetypal enemies of the covenant people. But these are not merely nations. They are the earthly expression of a cosmic allegiance. They march under the banner of Belial, and Belial is not a metaphor. He is a commander. He has a hierarchy. He has angelic subordinates. He has a jurisdiction, a domain, a territory of darkness that is organized with the same precision as the sons of light organize their own formations. The battlefield described in the War Scroll is one of the most atmospherically dense passages in all of ancient literature. The sons of light advance in 7 rows of infantry. Priests in white linen stand between the battle lines, not fighting, but conducting the liturgy of war. Trumpets sound specific calls for specific moments: the assembly, the advance, the ambush, the pursuit, the retreat, the slain. The banners carried into battle are inscribed with phrases that read like compressed theological arguments. The truth of God, the right hand of God, the vengeance of God, the tumult of God. The shields are polished bronze, described as bright as a face mirror. The swords are refined iron, purified in furnaces, ornamented with gold. The lances are 7 cubits long. This is war as sacrament. This is the battlefield as temple. The priests who stand between the lines are not chaplains in the modern sense, offering comfort to the frightened. They are liturgical officers conducting a sacred rite in which the killing of the enemy is itself an act of worship. The War Scroll does not separate the sacred from the violent. It fuses them. It imagines a universe in which the highest possible expression of covenantal faithfulness is to advance in formation against the army of darkness with a sword purified by fire and a shield bright enough to reflect the light of heaven. The angels fight alongside the human warriors. The text speaks of the majestic angel, of Michael, of the congregation of the gods engaging alongside the congregation of men. The battlefield is not merely a physical location. It is the place where the 2 layers of reality, the earthly and the cosmic, become temporarily one. The stars themselves, the text implies, are enlisted. The war is not fought beneath the heavens. The heavens are a participant. And Belial. Let us spend a moment with Belial, because he is one of the most philosophically interesting figures in all of ancient religious literature, precisely because he is not described. He does not appear in the War Scroll with a body, a face, a form. He is not a monster in the visual sense. He is a jurisdiction. He is a command structure. He is the organizational principle of everything that opposes the divine order, rendered as a general, as a sovereign, as a power that has its own hierarchy and its own appointed time. The horror of Belial is the horror of organized darkness, not chaos, which is at least honest in its disorder, but order in the service of destruction, a military hierarchy of shadow, a chain of command descending from a figure who is never seen, but whose authority is felt in every apostate priest, every corrupt ruler, every imperial soldier who has ever raised a hand against the covenant community. Now I want to tell you about the man at the center of all of this, the teacher of righteousness. He is never named in the texts. The community that revered him chose to protect him, or perhaps to mythologize him, by referring to him only through this title, the teacher of righteousness. The Damascus document, which preserves the sect's memory of its own origins, describes the period before the teacher's appearance as a time of spiritual blindness. For 390 years after the destruction of the first temple, the text says, Israel groped in darkness, unable to find the path. And then God raised up the teacher, a figure of Zadokite priestly lineage, and gave to him the ability to unlock what the text calls the mysteries of the words of the prophets. The prophetic texts of the Hebrew Bible, the teacher believed, were not primarily about the past. They were about his own time. They were coded messages whose true meaning had been sealed until the moment of the end, and the teacher was the one to whom the seal had been given to break. The Pesher Habakkuk, which is the community's commentary on the prophet Habakkuk, describes this interpretive authority in language that is both majestic and slightly unnerving. God made known to the teacher all the mysteries of the words of the servants, the prophets. Not some of the mysteries, all of them. The teacher does not interpret Scripture the way a scholar interprets it, weighing evidence, acknowledging uncertainty, revising conclusions in light of new data. The teacher decodes it. He reads the ancient prophetic text and finds in it a precise description of the events of his own age, his own enemies, his own community, the final timetable of the world. And once you believe that you hold the key to the decoding of history, the philosophical consequences are severe. Disagreement becomes not intellectual difference, but cosmic treason. The person who reads the text differently is not merely wrong. They are an agent of the spirit of falsehood. They belong, by definition, to the other side. The teacher's enemies are named in the texts with the same protective pseudonymity that surrounds the teacher himself: the wicked priest, the liar, sometimes called the spouter of lies, the house of Absalom. The Pesher Habakkuk describes the wicked priest as someone who began with a name of truth, who was perhaps initially a legitimate religious authority, but who became proud, amassed wealth, forsook God, and persecuted the teacher. The scholars have debated for generations who the wicked priest was in historical terms. A Hasmonean high priest, most likely. One of the figures who took the Jerusalem priesthood by political force rather than legitimate priestly lineage in the turbulent years of the 2nd century before the Common Era. But the historical identification matters less, for our purposes, than the theological function. The wicked priest is the proof that corruption is not accidental. It is not merely the failure of an individual. It is the visible symptom of Belial's influence within the institutions that should have been most resistant to it. The temple itself, the holiest site in the Jewish world, had been infiltrated by the darkness. And so the teacher and his community withdrew into the desert, into the silence, into the caves above the salt sea, to wait. Let the desert settle around you now. Let the pale cliffs rise on either side, and let the darkness of the caves become the darkness behind your closed eyes. The community at Qumran was not merely waiting passively. They were preparing. Every aspect of their communal life was structured as a rehearsal for the final age. The ritual baths, the cisterns cut into the rock and filled from the aqueduct, were not simply hygiene, they were boundary maintenance. The body had to be kept in a state of purity that matched the cosmic stakes of the moment. Impurity was not merely a ritual inconvenience. It was metaphysical contamination, a breach in the wall between the sons of light and the domain of Belial. The communal meals were eaten in silence, with careful attention to the order of precedence, because the meals were understood as rehearsals for the messianic banquet that would follow the final war. The scribes in the scriptorium worked with the knowledge that what they were copying might be the last true record of the divine will before the world as they knew it ended. There is something in this that moves me, even across 2,000 years of distance. A handful of people in a desert, living with the daily conviction that the universe was divided, that history was nearly over, that they alone understood the timetable of the end, and that their task was to preserve the truth in clay jars and leather and ink until the moment came. They were not naive. They were not simple. The theology they produced is among the most sophisticated and philosophically coherent systems of thought in the ancient world. They had their own calendar, which differed from the Jerusalem temple calendar, and this was not a minor administrative disagreement. To the community at Qumran, the Jerusalem temple was operating on the wrong cosmic schedule. The festivals were being observed on the wrong days. The entire apparatus of official religion was, in their view, running on Belial's time. The calendar disagreement was theological rebellion expressed in arithmetic. Some of the scrolls were written in cryptic scripts, unusual letter forms that required specialized knowledge to read. The community encoded its most sensitive materials in ciphers that only initiates could unlock. Time itself was sectarian. Knowledge was guarded. The desert was a fortress of the mind as much as of the body. And then there is the copper scroll. Among the hundreds of manuscripts found in the caves, one is categorically unlike all the others. Not written on leather or papyrus, but incised into thin sheets of copper alloyed with tin. A document so brittle with age that when it was found, it had fused into a solid cylinder and had to be carefully sawed apart in a laboratory. The copper scroll does not contain theology. It does not contain prophecy or community rules or apocalyptic visions. It contains a list of buried treasures, specific locations, described in the atmospheric language of a landscape that no longer exists in recognizable form. In the ruin of the valley of Achor, under the stairs that ascend toward the east, 40 cubits, a box of silver. The directions are precise and maddeningly incomplete, terminating in cryptic Greek letter codes whose meaning has never been agreed upon. The copper scroll creates a tonal rupture in the archive. Alongside the hymns and the battle plans and the theological treatises, someone thought it necessary to preserve a map. The caves contain not only prophecy, but the memory of vanished wealth. Perhaps temple treasure. Perhaps symbolic inventory of everything that was lost when the world the community was trying to save finally ended. Now let me take you somewhere else, not away from the desert, but deeper into the imaginative universe that the desert community inherited. Because the war scroll did not emerge from nowhere, the cosmic battle between light and darkness, the divine warrior defeating the forces of chaos, the idea that the universe is constituted by a conflict between order and its opposite, these are not ideas that began at Qumran. They are among the oldest ideas in human religious history, and they appear, in different forms, across cultures that had no direct contact with one another. In Babylon, 3,000 years before the Common Era, the great creation myth, known as the Enuma Elish, described the origin of the universe as the aftermath of a cosmic battle. Marduk, the young storm god, faced Tiamat, the primordial sea goddess, the embodiment of the watery chaos that preceded creation. The battle was not symbolic. Marduk killed Tiamat. He split her body in half. From one half he made the firmament of the sky. From the other he made the foundation of the earth. From the blood of her consort Kingu he fashioned humanity, created for the explicit purpose of bearing the labor of the gods. The universe, in the Babylonian telling, is not a gift, it is a wound. It is the organized remains of a slaughter. Order is not the natural state of things. It is a military achievement, maintained by the ongoing authority of the victor. The Qumran community inherited this ancient grammar without adopting its mythology directly. They did not believe that God had created the world from the body of a slain monster. But they did believe that the universe was constituted by conflict, that order required violence to maintain itself, that the forces of chaos were not merely absent, but actively organized and actively threatening. The War Scroll is, in one sense, the Enuma Elish projected forward into the future. Instead of creation from primordial combat, purification through final war, instead of Marduk's kingship established in the past, God's eternal dominion to be revealed in the coming age. The mythic grammar is the same. The temporal orientation is reversed. In Ugarit, the great Canaanite city of the second millennium before the Common Era, the storm god Baal fought the sea god Yam, the embodiment of chaotic waters, and the death god Mot, the lord of the underworld. The Baal cycle, preserved on clay tablets discovered in the ruins of Ugarit in the 1930s, describes a world in which the boundary between order and chaos was not fixed but contested, in which the god of storm and fertility had to fight repeatedly to maintain the conditions that made human life possible. The echoes of this mythology in the Hebrew Bible are unmistakable. Psalm 74 praises God for dividing the sea by his might, for crushing the heads of the dragons in the waters, for breaking the heads of Leviathan. Leviathan is Lotan, the Canaanite sea serpent, the chaos monster of the abyss. The biblical poets knew this mythology and they used it, not to endorse it but to claim its imagery for their own theology. Yahweh does what Baal does, but Yahweh does it once, definitively, and the chaos never comes back. Or rather, it has not come back yet. The War Scroll insists that it will come back one final time, and that its defeat will be permanent. In Egypt, the cosmic struggle took the form of the nightly journey of the sun god Ra through the underworld. Every night, as Ra's solar bark descended below the horizon, the great serpent Apophis, the embodiment of chaos and darkness and the void that surrounds the ordered world, attacked the bark and attempted to swallow the sun. Every night, Ra and his retinue of warrior gods fought Apophis back. Every morning the sunrise was not a meteorological event. It was a military victory. The ordered world had survived another assault. The light had fought its way back through the darkness. The Egyptians performed elaborate rituals to assist in this nightly battle, reciting spells, burning effigies of Apophis, because the cosmic struggle was not something that happened independently of human participation. The righteous had a role to play in maintaining the conditions of the ordered world. The Qumran community would have recognized this immediately. They too believed that the righteous had a role to play, that their purity, their prayer, their communal discipline, their careful observance of the correct calendar was not merely personal piety, but cosmic maintenance. They were holding the line until the final battle. They were keeping the light alive in the desert until the moment when God's great hand would descend and end the contest permanently. And from Persia, from the ancient Iranian tradition of Zoroastrianism, came perhaps the most direct influence on the theology of the two spirits. The Gathas, the oldest hymns of the Zoroastrian tradition, attributed to the prophet Zarathustra himself, describe a universe divided between Ahura Mazda, the wise lord of light and truth, and Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit of darkness and lies. The parallel to the community rule's two spirits is not accidental and not superficial. It is structural. The Zoroastrian tradition imagined a defined period of cosmic history, a limited time during which Angra Mainyu was permitted to wage his campaign, at the end of which Ahura Mazda would achieve final and permanent victory. The concept of a predetermined eschatological timetable, of a cosmic war with a scheduled conclusion, of human souls sorted by their alignment with truth or with the lie. These ideas flowed into Second Temple Judaism through the channels of the Persian period, when Jewish communities lived under Achaemenid rule and absorbed the intellectual atmosphere of the Iranian world. The scholars are careful to say that Qumran did not simply copy Zoroastrianism, but they are equally clear that the two-spirit doctrine of the community rule emerges in a world already saturated with these ideas, and that the resemblance is too deep and too specific to be coincidental. Let yourself sink a little deeper now. The night is very old, and we are going somewhere that exists only in the space between waking and dreaming. I want to tell you about a text found in the caves that most people have never heard of. A text that reaches into the deepest strata of the mythological imagination and pulls out something that should not be possible to find in a document from the 2nd century before the Common Era. The document is catalogued as 11Q13. It is a fragmentary text from Cave 11, and it concerns a figure named Melchizedek. In the canonical book of Genesis, Melchizedek appears for exactly 3 verses. He is the king of Salem and a priest of God Most High, and he blesses Abraham after a battle, and Abraham gives him 1/10 of everything, and then he vanishes from the narrative as suddenly as he appeared. The text from Cave 11 takes this fleeting, mysterious figure and transforms him into something that should not be possible in the theology of the Hebrew tradition. The Qumran text identifies Melchizedek not as a human king, but as an Elohim, a divine being, an angelic power of immense authority, and it assigns to him a specific eschatological function. In the final age, Melchizedek will descend from the heavens. He will execute divine judgment upon Belial and his spirits. He will proclaim liberation to the captives of darkness. He will be, in some sense that the fragmentary text does not fully explain, the agent of salvation for the sons of light. The text is structured as an apocalyptic commentary on the Jubilee year described in the book of Leviticus, the year of release, the year when debts are canceled and prisoners are freed. The Qumran community read this as a prophecy about the final cosmic Jubilee, when Melchizedek would descend and cancel the debt of darkness that had accumulated over all of human history. And some scholars have noted, with varying degrees of caution, that this text anticipates by more than a century the theology of the New Testament's letter to the Hebrews, which also elevates Melchizedek to a divine or semi-divine status and uses him as a template for understanding the significance of Jesus. The concept of a pre-existent divine figure who descends to defeat evil and liberate the righteous was not invented by early Christianity. It was already alive in the desert, in the caves above the Dead Sea, in the hands of scribes who believed the end was near. There was also the matter of the document known as 4Q186. the Qumran physiognomies. It is one of the most unsettling texts in the entire corpus, not because of what it describes, but because of what it implies. The text determines the proportion of a person's soul that belongs to the house of light versus the house of darkness, based on their physical characteristics and the position of celestial bodies at the moment of their birth. The soul, the text implies, is divided into 9 parts. A person born under certain alignments might have 6 parts in the house of light and 3 in the darkness. Another might have 8 parts in the darkness. The text does not suggest that this proportion can be changed. It is a fact about the person, as fixed as the position of the stars at the moment of their birth. You are not simply choosing to be righteous or unrighteous. You are, at a fundamental level, constituted by your cosmic address. The Qumran community, which already believed in predestination at the level of the 2 spirits, extended this logic into the body itself, into the proportions of the face and limbs, into the arithmetic of the soul. You are born, the text insists, as either a son of light or a son of darkness. The body is the evidence. And then there is the tradition that the community preserved from the world of the Book of Enoch. Aramaic fragments of Enoch were found in Cave 4, and among them were texts related to what scholars call the Book of Giants, an expansion of the Watcher mythology that filled in the details of what happened after the fallen angels descended from heaven and took human wives. The offspring of those unions, the Nephilim, were not merely large. They were apex predators, consuming crops, livestock, and eventually humanity itself. The disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, destroyed in the flood but not annihilated, became the demonic forces that wander the earth in every subsequent age. The War Scroll's final battle is not an isolated event in the Qumran imagination. It is the last engagement of a rebellion that began before ordinary human history. In the moment when the boundary between the celestial and the earthly was first breached by the Watchers on the summit of Mount Hermon. The horror of the Watcher tradition is a specific kind of horror. It is not the horror of human wickedness, which is at least familiar and in some sense comprehensible. It is the horror of external invasion. Humanity, in the Enochic telling, is not primarily the author of its own corruption. Humanity is the victim of beings vastly superior in power and intelligence. Beings who introduced into the human world knowledge that was never meant to be here, who bred into the human population something that could not be domesticated or controlled, and whose disembodied offspring have been preying on human consciousness ever since. The flood was not a punishment for human sin in the Enochic framework. It was a military tactic, a scorched earth response to a biological and spiritual contamination that had progressed beyond any other remedy. The later religious authorities, both the rabbis who shaped Judaism after the destruction of the temple and the church councils that defined Christian orthodoxy in the 4th century, found this tradition deeply uncomfortable. The Council of Laodicea, around 363 of the Common Era, along with subsequent councils at Hippo and Carthage, excluded the Book of Enoch from the canon. The reasons were partly practical. The text was long and complex and existed in multiple versions. But they were also theological. The idea that angels could experience fleshly desire, that they could reproduce with human women, that the corruption of the world was the result of a cosmic invasion rather than a simple human moral failure. This challenged the developing theology of human responsibility, divine sovereignty, and the nature of the spiritual world in ways that the emerging orthodoxies were not prepared to accommodate. The Enochic tradition was not lost entirely. It survived in complete form only in the Ge'ez language, preserved by the monks of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church in remote mountain monasteries, until the caves above the Dead Sea gave it back to the world in 1947. The texts are sleeping now. The caves are dark. The leather is still. The ink is fading imperceptibly, molecule by molecule, into the limestone and the salt air, as it has been fading for 2,000 years. And what was written on that leather, what was pressed into it by reed pens in the scriptorium of a community that believed the world was ending, is now available to anyone with a library card or an internet connection. The secrets of the desert are public, and yet they remain, in some fundamental sense, sealed. Not by clay or linen or cave darkness, but by the distance between the world that produced them and the world that reads them now. We can translate the words. We cannot fully inhabit the consciousness that wrote them. Let the cliffs dissolve now. Let the cisterns fill with still water, and then let the water evaporate, slowly, in the desert heat, leaving only the white mineral residue of salt on stone. Let the scriptorium grow quiet. Let the inkwells dry. Let the scrolls curl at their edges and settle into the darkness of the jars that will hold them for another age, or another two, or however long the stone and the salt and the silence choose to keep them. You are lying in the dark now. And the dark is not Belial's darkness. It is simply the darkness of a room, of a night, of a body that has carried you through another day and is asking, very gently, to rest. The sons of light and the sons of darkness have been fighting their appointed battle for longer than any of us can fully comprehend. And the seventh lot has not yet been called, and the great hand has not yet descended. And the desert is still keeping its secrets in its pale limestone caves above the salt sea. But you do not need to march tonight. You do not need to hold a formation or carry a banner or listen for the trumpet's call. You can simply breathe, in and out, slowly, the way the desert breathes at night, which is to say, almost not at all. Just the faintest movement of cool air through the cave mouths, just the settling of ancient stone. I want to ask you something, very quietly, as you drift toward sleep. If the scribes who sealed those jars could have known that their words would survive 2,000 years and be read by someone lying in the dark on the other side of the world, what do you think they would have wanted that person to understand? Not the military formations, not the theological arguments, but the thing underneath all of it, the thing that made them leave the city and go into the desert and press words into leather by lamplight until their eyes ached. What was it, underneath the apocalypse, that they were trying to say? The caves are still there. The cliffs are still pale above the salt sea. And somewhere in the darkness of the archive, there are fragments that have not yet been fully read, texts that have not yet been fully understood, questions that have not yet been fully asked. The vault is not empty, it is only waiting, the way the desert waits, with the particular patience of things that have already survived longer than anyone expected them to survive. Come back when the night is quiet, and we will open another jar together. Let the stone close around the scrolls now. Let the darkness hold them. Let the salt air keep them. And let your breathing slow, and slow again, and carry you down into the deep and wordless place where even the oldest questions finally rest.
We will return to open this jar together.